The hospital room was silent, except for the rhythmic beeping of the monitor. Sophia Lane sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she stared at the DNA test results in her lap. Her heart raced, the words blurring before her eyes. 99.9 match. There was no denying it now. The father of her unborn child wasn't just anyone. He was Sebastian Grey, the President of Veridia. For weeks, she had battled with herself. Should she keep this secret buried or take the leap that would change her life forever? But now, staring at the undeniable truth, Sophia knew what she had to do. She grabbed her phone, her fingers hesitating over the number she swore she'd never dial. As the call connected, her voice shook. I need to see him. He deserves to know. What will happen when Sophia faces the most powerful man in the country with a secret that could destroy them both? Where are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic stories like this one. Sophia Lane stared at her reflection in the mirror, her chestnut brown eyes scanning the soft waves of her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. The sleek black dress she wore hugged her figure in all the right places, but she tugged at the hem nervously. Tonight was supposed to be a night of fun, of letting loose and forgetting about Ethan, the man who had not only betrayed her, but left her questioning her worth. She sighed, smoothing the fabric of her dress, and glanced at her best friend, Mia, who stood by the door, grinning. You look incredible, Sophia. Trust me, tonight's going to be exactly what you need, Maya said, tossing her blonde curls over her shoulder. Sophia rolled her eyes, half smiling. You're really convinced this party will magically fix my life, huh? It won't fix it, but it'll remind you there's more to life than crying over a man who wasn't worth your time. Sophia gave in, letting Maya drag her out of the tiny apartment they shared. Within 30 minutes, they arrived at Veridia Tower, the most luxurious venue in the city, glowing under the lights of downtown Wardoria. The entrance was crowded with high-profile attendees, each dressed to perfection. Sophia suddenly felt out of place among the wealth and glamour. Inside, the grand ballroom shimmered with golden chandeliers, the sound of clinking glasses and laughter filling the air. A live jazz band played in the corner, their music weaving through the lively chatter of the elite. Sophia followed Maya hesitantly, clutching her clutch bag like a lifeline. You need a drink, Mia announced, steering Sophia toward the bar. As they approached, a man stepped aside, allowing them to pass. For a brief moment, Sophia caught his gaze. He had striking features, sharp cheekbones, piercing gray eyes, and an aura of confidence that seemed to make the air around him hum. He offered her a small smile before disappearing into the crowd. Sophia shook off the strange feeling his presence left and focused on Maya, who handed her a martini. To freedom from losers, Mia said, raising her glass. Sophia laughed despite herself and clinked her glass against Maya's. The drink went down smoother than she expected, and soon another followed, then another. The room blurred slightly, but Sophia found herself laughing more easily, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. Hours passed, and the crowd grew more vibrant. Maya had wandered off to mingle, leaving Sophia by the bar. She toyed with the stem of her glass when she felt someone step beside her. Not enjoying the party? A deep voice asked. Sophia turned, her breath hitching as she recognized the man she'd seen earlier. Up close, he was even more striking, his tailored suit emphasizing his broad shoulders. It's not really my scene, she admitted, suddenly self-conscious. Then why are you here? His lips curved into a smirk as he sipped his whiskey. My friend dragged me along. She thought I needed a night out, Sophia replied, shrugging. And what about you? Do you enjoy these kinds of things? He chuckled, the sound low and rich. Not particularly, but sometimes appearances are necessary. Something about the way he spoke intrigued her. He carried himself with a quiet authority, his every movement deliberate. They continued talking, their conversation flowing effortlessly. Sophia found herself sharing more than she intended, her frustrations, her dreams of becoming a respected journalist, and even the heartbreak she was trying to move past. And what about you? She asked, leaning slightly closer. What's your story? The man hesitated, his gaze flickering with something she couldn't quite place. Let's just say I have a demanding job that doesn't leave much room for a personal life. Sophia raised an eyebrow, sensing there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Instead, she laughed. She laughed, joking about how they both seemed to be in the wrong place. I'm Sebastian, by the way, he said finally, extending his hand. Sophia. She took his hand, surprised by the warmth of his touch. As the night wore on, the crowd began to thin, but Sophia and Sebastian remained by the bar, lost in their conversation. She felt an unusual ease around him, as though she'd known him for longer than a few hours. Her head buzzed pleasantly from the alcohol, and her usual overthinking melted away. Do you want to get some air? He asked, his voice softer now. Sophia nodded, letting him lead her to the rooftop terrace. The cool night breeze brushed against her flushed skin as they stepped outside. The city lights stretched out before them, a glittering sea of gold and white. This is incredible, Sophia said, leaning against the railing. Sebastian stood beside her, his gaze fixed on her rather than the view. It is, he murmured, though it was clear he wasn't talking about the city. Sophia felt her cheeks heat under his intense gaze. She wasn't used to being looked at like that, like she was the only thing that mattered. I don't usually do this, she said, breaking the silence. Do what? Talk to strangers all night. He smiled, a genuine warmth in his expression. Neither do I. For a moment, the world seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them under the stars. Then, as if drawn by some invisible force, Sebastian leaned closer. Sophia's breath caught, and before she could overthink it, their lips met. The kiss was electric, igniting something in her she hadn't felt in years. Her hands found their way to his chest, and his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. When they finally pulled apart, Sophia felt dazed, her heart racing. Let's go somewhere quieter, Sebastian suggested, his voice low and filled with unspoken promises. Sophia hesitated, her rational mind screaming at her to stop, but the alcohol and the pull of the moment silenced her doubts. She nodded, letting him lead her back inside and into the elevator. The ride to his penthouse was a blur, her nerves tingling with anticipation and fear. The suite was as grand as she'd expected. Floor to ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city, minimalist decor with hints of luxury. Sebastian poured them each a glass of wine, but neither of them drank much. The air between them was charged, and soon they were tangled together on the plush sofa, their kisses growing more urgent. Sophia's mind screamed at her to stop, to think, but her body refused to listen. For the first time in years, she let go of her inhibitions and allowed herself to feel. Hours later, Sophia woke to sunlight streaming through the windows. Her head throbbed slightly, and for a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then, the events of the night before came rushing back. She sat up, clutching the blanket to her chest, and glanced around the room. Sebastian was nowhere to be seen. On the nightstand, she spotted a glass of water and a note. Had to leave early. Take care, Sebastian. Her stomach churned, not from the hangover, but from the sinking feeling of what she'd done. She hurriedly got dressed, her cheeks burning with shame. As she stepped into the elevator, she told herself it was just one night, a mistake she'd never repeat. But deep down, she couldn't shake the memory of his touch or the way he'd looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Weeks had passed since the night Sophia left Sebastian's penthouse, and life had returned to its routine. At least that's what she told herself. She buried herself in work, taking on extra assignments at the magazine where she worked as a junior journalist. If she stayed busy enough, maybe she could forget the way her chest tightened when she thought of him. Her nights were restless, haunted by memories of his touch and the intoxicating ease of their conversations. But the sharp pang of shame reminded her why she had to move on. It was a one-night stand, a fleeting mistake with a man who had left no more than a scribbled note behind. That was all. It had to be. One morning, Sophia woke with a wave of nausea that hit her like a train. Rushing to the bathroom, she barely made it to the sink before the bile rose in her throat. As she rinsed her mouth and leaned against the cool porcelain, a flicker of worry crept into her mind. It was the third morning in a row this had happened. She dismissed it as stress. Perhaps she had pushed herself too hard at work. But the symptoms didn't stop. Days turned into weeks, and Sophia found herself battling not just the nausea, but a persistent exhaustion that made getting through the day feel like a marathon. Mia noticed too, pulling Sophia aside one evening as they sat on their worn apartment couch. "Soph, are you okay? You look pale, and you've been acting off lately," Maya said, her brow furrowed with concern. "I'm fine, Mia. Just work stress, that's all," Sophia replied, brushing it off. Maya didn't look convinced. "You've been throwing up in the mornings. That's not stress. It's time to see a doctor." Sophia opened her mouth to argue but closed it again. Maya was right, and deep down, she knew it. The next day, she found herself sitting in a sterile clinic, waiting for the results of her tests. The doctor returned, her face calm but unreadable as she sat across from Sophia. "Sophia," the doctor began, her voice gentle, "you're pregnant." Sophia's heart stopped. The room seemed to spin as the words sank in. Pregnant. Her breath hitched as she tried to comprehend the enormity of it. Her mind flashed back to that night with Sebastian. The wine, the laughter, the undeniable pull between them. And then the realization hit her like a tidal wave. The doctor's voice broke through her thoughts. "You're about 8 weeks along. It's early, but everything looks healthy so far." Sophia nodded numbly, clutching the edge of her chair. The doctor continued, offering advice and pamphlets about prenatal care, but Sophia barely heard her. She walked out of the clinic in a daze, clutching the confirmation of her pregnancy in trembling hands. Back at the apartment, Maya was waiting, her concern evident the moment Sophia walked through the door. "Well?" Mia asked, scanning Sophia's face for answers. Sophia swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I'm pregnant." Maya's eyes widened, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she pulled Sophia into a tight hug. "We'll figure this out," Mia said firmly, her voice steady. "You're not alone." But Sophia felt utterly alone. Her parents, though not overly strict, had always held traditional values. She could already hear their disappointment echoing in her mind. And as for Sebastian, Sophia laughed bitterly at the thought. What kind of man would he be, anyway? He left her without a second thought. There was no way she could count on him. As the weeks went by, Sophia tried to keep her pregnancy a secret. She focused on work, carefully avoiding questions about her growing exhaustion and faint nausea during morning meetings. But one afternoon, while scrolling through the news on her laptop, a headline caught her eye. President Sebastian Grey hosts international summit in Veridia. The accompanying photo showed him standing confidently at a podium, addressing world leaders. Her chest tightened as she stared at the image. His sharp jawline, those piercing gray eyes, there was no mistaking him. The man she had spent the night with was not just anyone. He was the President of Veridia. Sophia slammed her laptop shut, her heart pounding. It couldn't be. How had she not recognized him? Then again, she had been too distracted by the chemistry between them, too caught up in the moment to question who he was. Now she knew, and it terrified her. She paced the apartment for hours, her mind racing. What was she supposed to do? Reach out to the president of Veridia and tell him she was pregnant with his child? The thought was absurd. Men like him didn't deal with things like this. He was untouchable, living in a world far removed from hers. And yet she couldn't ignore the truth. That night, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her hand rested on her stomach, where a tiny life was growing. She thought of the baby's future, of what kind of mother she wanted to be. No matter how overwhelming it felt, she knew one thing. She had to protect her child. With or without Sebastian, she would figure it out. Sophia began making changes in her life. She picked up freelance writing jobs to save money, knowing that her current job wouldn't sustain her once the baby arrived. She avoided alcohol and cut back on caffeine, despite the exhaustion that clung to her every day. But the uncertainty of the future loomed over her, an ever-present shadow. One evening, Maya came home to find Sophia sitting on the couch, staring at the ultrasound photo from her last doctor's appointment. "Still thinking about him?" Maya asked softly, sitting beside her. Sophia nodded. "He's the father, Maya, and I don't know what to do." Maya frowned. "Do you even know how to contact him?" "No," Sophia admitted. "But it's not like I could just show up at the presidential palace and tell him. What would I even say? 'Hi, Mr. President, remember me? By the way, you're going to be a dad.'" She laughed bitterly. "Maybe he deserves to know," Maya said after a pause. "But it's your decision, Soph. If you don't want him involved, that's your choice too." Sophia stared at the ultrasound photo, her emotions swirling. She didn't trust him, not yet, but a part of her wondered if Mia was right. Did he have the right to know, or would telling him only complicate things further? The thought weighed heavily on her as she climbed into bed that night. For now she decided she would keep the secret to herself. The world didn't need to know, and neither did Sebastian. At least, not yet. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that fate had other plans. Sophia sat at her desk in the bustling newsroom, typing furiously on her laptop as she finalized an article about the mayor's recent initiatives. It was just another day in her chaotic routine, but something about the assignment she had been handed earlier nagged at her. Her editor, Mr. Porter, had insisted she cover the president's upcoming press conference at Veridia Palace. She had tried to refuse. The very idea of being in the same room as Sebastian Grey, the man who was unknowingly the father of her unborn child, was enough to make her stomach churn. But Porter had been adamant, leaving her no choice but to agree. The day of the press conference arrived faster than she expected. As she stood in the grand entryway of Veridia Palace, clutching her notepad and recorder, her heart pounded like a drum. The opulence of the palace, with its marble floors and gilded walls, felt suffocating, a stark contrast to the modest life she lived. Sophia blended into the crowd of journalists and photographers, her nerves fraying with every step she took toward the conference room. As she entered, she spotted him immediately. There he was, standing at the podium with his signature composed demeanor, speaking confidently to the room full of reporters. The sight of him was both electrifying and terrifying. Sebastian's presence commanded the room. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, his sharp features illuminated by the camera flashes. He answered questions with ease, his voice steady and authoritative. But to Sophia, he was no longer just the enigmatic man she had shared a night with. He was the president of an entire nation, a figure so far removed from her world that it felt almost absurd. Her plan was simple: stay in the back, keep her head down, and gather enough material for her article without drawing attention to herself. But fate, as always, had other plans. Next question, Sebastian said, scanning the room. His gray eyes landed on Sophia, and for a brief moment his expression faltered. Recognition flashed across his face, but he quickly masked it, his professional facade intact. Sophia's breath hitched. She prayed he wouldn't single her out, but her hopes were dashed when he gestured toward her. "You in the back," he said, his gaze steady. Sophia's heart dropped. She stood slowly, feeling every pair of eyes in the room turn toward her. Clearing her throat, she forced herself to speak. "Mr. President, how does your administration plan to address the growing concerns about economic inequality in Veridia?" she asked, her voice surprisingly even. Sebastian answered her question smoothly, but his gaze never wavered from hers. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even confusion, that made her feel exposed. When the press conference ended, Sophia hurried to pack up her things, eager to escape before he could approach her. But as she made her way toward the exit, a member of the presidential staff stopped her. "Miss Lane, the president would like a word with you," the man said politely, though his tone left no room for refusal. Sophia's stomach churned as she was led down a corridor to a private room. When the door opened, Sebastian was there, waiting. The room was smaller and more intimate than the grand hall they had just left, with a large oak desk and a set of plush chairs by the window. "Miss Lane," he said, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity. "Or should I say, Sophia?" Her breath caught in her throat. He remembered. "Mr. President," she replied, forcing herself to meet his gaze. He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, clutching her notepad tightly. "It's been a while," he said, his tone measured. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't expect to be here," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "I'm just covering the story for my job." Sebastian studied her, his piercing gray eyes searching hers. "You disappeared that morning," he said, his tone softening. "I thought," he trailed off, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter. Why didn't you say anything during the press conference?" Sophia hesitated, the weight of her secret pressing down on her. "I didn't think it was appropriate," she said carefully. He leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. "Is there something you need to tell me, Sophia?" Her heart raced. This was it. The moment she had dreaded and rehearsed in her mind countless times. But as she looked into his eyes, she felt her resolve waver. I'm pregnant," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Sebastian's expression shifted from confusion to shock, and he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're pregnant?" he repeated, as though trying to process the information. "Is it?" "Yes," she interrupted, her voice firmer now. "It's yours." Sebastian ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. For a man who exuded confidence and control, he suddenly seemed uncharacteristically unsettled. "I don't even know what to say," he admitted, stopping to face her. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Sophia bristled at his tone. "Tell you sooner? How was I supposed to do that, Sebastian? I didn't even know who you were until I saw you on the news. And even if I had known, what was I supposed to do? Walk into the presidential palace and announce it?" He opened his mouth to respond, but closed it again, clearly at a loss. "Look," she continued, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I don't expect anything from you. I just thought you deserved to know." Sebastian stared at her, his expression softening. "Sophia, this isn't just about me. It's about the child, our child." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, and for a moment she didn't know how to respond. "I want to be involved," he said firmly. "Whatever you need, financial support, medical care, anything, I'll provide it." Sophia shook her head. "I'm not here for your money, Sebastian. I can handle this on my own." "It's not just about money," he said, stepping closer. "I want to be there, for you and for the baby." His words hung in the air, laced with a determination that made her chest tighten. She wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. "This isn't simple, Sebastian," she said, her voice softer now. "You're the president. Your life is complicated enough without this." He smiled faintly, a hint of warmth breaking through his composed exterior. "My life has always been complicated, Sophia, but this is something I can't ignore. For the first time since the conversation began, Sophia allowed herself to relax slightly. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she saw a glimpse of the man behind the title, a man who seemed willing to fight for something real. The tension between them eased, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Sophia left the room with a mix of relief and apprehension, her thoughts racing as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. Sebastian watched her go, his mind spinning with the weight of her revelation. One thing was clear, his life had just changed forever. Sebastian couldn't stop thinking about Sophia after their conversation. Her words echoed in his mind. I don't expect anything from you. Yet he couldn't let her handle this alone, not when his child was growing inside her. For all the control and power he wielded as president, the revelation of fatherhood had left him vulnerable, unsure of the right steps to take. The very next day, Sebastian called his assistant, Greg, into his office. Find out where Sophia Lane lives, he said, without preamble. Greg raised an eyebrow, but Sebastian's sharp gaze silenced any questions. Discreetly, I don't want her harassed. Within hours, he had an address. That evening, he stood outside the modest apartment building, his tailored suit contrasting starkly with the peeling paint of the walls. It was far from the palatial surroundings he was used to, but Sebastian wasn't deterred. He climbed the stairs, each step weighed down by uncertainty, and knocked on the door. When Sophia opened it, her expression shifted from surprise to annoyance. What are you doing here? She asked, crossing her arms over her chest. I wanted to talk, Sebastian said, his voice calm but insistent. May I come in? Sophia hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. The apartment was small but tidy, the scent of freshly brewed tea wafting from the kitchen. She sighed and stepped aside. 5 minutes, she said, her tone wary. Sebastian stepped inside, taking in the humble furnishings. A framed photo on a side table caught his eye. Sophia smiling with another woman he assumed was her roommate. It was a glimpse into her world, far removed from his. Thank you, he said, sitting cautiously on the edge of the worn couch. Sophia remained standing, watching him with guarded eyes. What do you want, Sebastian? I want to help, he said simply. You're carrying my child, Sophia. I need to be involved, not just financially, but emotionally. This isn't something I can ignore. She let out a bitter laugh. And how do you think that will work? You're the president of Veridia. Your life is under a microscope. You can't exactly show up to prenatal appointments without creating a media frenzy. I know it's complicated, he admitted, leaning forward, but I'll figure it out. I have resources, Sophia. I can make this easier for you, for both of us. She shook her head, frustration etched on her face. I've been doing fine on my own. I don't need your pity or your solutions. It's not pity, Sebastian said, his voice firm. It's responsibility. I can't change what happened that night, but I can choose to be here now. Sophia stared at him, the weight of his words pressing on her. She wanted to push him away, to keep her life separate from his chaos, but a small part of her couldn't ignore the sincerity in his voice. I don't know if I can trust you, she said quietly. Sebastian's expression softened. I understand, but let me prove that you can. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken fears and possibilities. Finally, Sophia nodded, though the doubt in her eyes remained. In the weeks that followed, Sebastian made good on his promise. He arranged for private prenatal care, sending a discreet doctor to her apartment to avoid drawing attention. He ensured she had everything she needed, from vitamins to maternity clothes. Despite Sophia's protests, he even paid her rent for the next 6 months, insisting it was for the baby's sake. Their interactions remained tense at first, their conversations laced with unresolved tension. But gradually, as Sebastian showed up consistently, whether to check on her or accompany her to doctor's appointments, Sophia began to see a different side of him. One afternoon, as they sat in the doctor's office, the ultrasound machine hummed to life. The screen displayed a grainy black and white image of their child. Sophia's breath hitched, and she reached for the edge of the examination table, her eyes fixed on the tiny flicker of the baby's heartbeat. "That's amazing," she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. Sebastian, sitting beside her, couldn't tear his gaze away from the screen. For a man who dealt with world leaders and national crises daily, this moment felt far more monumental. Without thinking, he reached out and took Sophia's hand. She stiffened at first, but didn't pull away. "I can't believe that's our baby," he said, his voice filled with awe. For the first time, the walls between them seemed to crack, if only slightly. However, their fragile truce was tested when the media got wind of their connection. A leaked photo of them leaving the doctor's office together sparked a flurry of headlines. President's secret scandal. A child on the way. Paparazzi swarmed her apartment, and reporters hounded her at every turn. Sophia was livid. She stormed into the presidential palace unannounced, barging into Sebastian's office. His staff looked stunned, but Sebastian waved them off, his expression darkening when he saw her fury. "You promised to keep this private," she snapped, slamming the tabloid onto his desk. "I had nothing to do with this," he said, standing to face her. "I've already launched an investigation into the leak. Do you have any idea what it's like to have cameras in your face everywhere you go? I can't even leave my apartment without being ambushed." Her voice broke, and she blinked back tears. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." Sebastian rounded the desk and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sophia, I'm sorry. I'll fix this. I promise." "How?" she demanded. "You can't erase this." "I can protect you," he said firmly, "and I will." Over the next few days, Sebastian worked tirelessly to control the narrative. He held a press conference, addressing the rumors head on. Standing before a sea of reporters, he spoke with calm conviction. "I've always valued my privacy," he began, "but recent speculation regarding my personal life compels me to speak. I can confirm that I am expecting a child with Miss Sophia Lane. While this is a deeply personal matter, I want to make one thing clear. I am fully committed to supporting both her and our child." The statement was met with a mix of shock and intrigue, but it succeeded in taking some of the pressure off Sophia. Public opinion shifted, with many admiring his honesty and dedication. That night, Sebastian visited Sophia's apartment. She let him in, her expression unreadable. "I meant what I said," he told her, his voice steady. "I'm here for the long haul." Sophia sighed, sitting on the couch. "It's not just about being here, Sebastian. It's about whether you can handle this, a life outside the palace, outside the spotlight. He sat beside her, his gaze unwavering. I don't want to just handle this, Sophia. I want to make it work. Her walls, built so carefully over the months, began to crumble. She leaned back, her hand resting on her growing belly. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out together. Okay, she said softly. Let's see if we can make this work. Sebastian smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that lit up the room. For the first time, Sophia felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but they were no longer walking it alone. The weeks that followed Sebastian's public revelation brought a strange calm to Sophia's chaotic life. The media frenzy had died down slightly, and while she still occasionally spotted a camera or heard whispers when she ventured outside, the worst of it seemed to have passed. The worst of it seemed to have passed. Sebastian had kept his word, arranging for discreet security around her building and ensuring the press kept their distance. Despite his constant presence and unwavering support, Sophia still grappled with her own doubts. She couldn't shake the fear that his actions stemmed more from duty than genuine emotion. That fear gnawed at her, creating a distance she wasn't ready to bridge. One evening, Sebastian invited Sophia to dinner at his private residence, a smaller, less imposing building compared to the presidential palace. She hesitated at first but ultimately agreed, partly out of curiosity and partly because she wanted to understand his motivations better. The dining room was intimate, with warm lighting and a table set for two. A far cry from the formal banquets she imagined presidents hosting. He greeted her at the door, dressed casually in a crisp white shirt, with the sleeves rolled up, his usual composed demeanor softened. You look lovely, he said as she stepped inside, his eyes lingering on her for a moment. Sophia glanced down at her simple maternity dress and laughed. I'm hardly dressed for anything fancy. Perfect is the word I'd use, he replied, gesturing for her to follow him. Dinner was a quiet affair, with the kind of ease that had begun to settle between them. They talked about her day, her progress on a freelance article she'd been working on, and the latest updates from her doctor. But as dessert was served, the conversation took a more serious turn. Sophia, Sebastian began, his voice low, I know you still don't trust me completely, and I understand why. But there's something I've been meaning to tell you. She set down her fork, her brows furrowing slightly. Sebastian hesitated, a rare crack in his composed exterior. There's someone I need to tell you about. Someone from my past. Sophia's stomach twisted, but she kept her expression neutral. Go on. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. Before I became president, there was a woman I loved, Anna. We were together for years, and I thought I'd spend my life with her. Sophia's chest tightened. She hadn't expected this, but she forced herself to listen. We were young and in love, but when my political career started to take off, things changed. The long hours, the scrutiny. It was too much for her. She wanted a simple life, and I couldn't give that to her. He paused, his jaw tightening. In the end, she left, and I let her because I thought I had no other choice. Sophia's voice was quiet when she spoke. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want history to repeat itself, he said, meeting her eyes. I don't want to lose you or our child because I'm too consumed by my career. I've made mistakes before, but I'm trying to be better this time. The raw honesty in his words caught her off guard. For the first time, she saw not the President of Veridia, but a man who had known loss and regret. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to say anything, he replied. Just let me be part of your life. Let me prove to you that I'm here for the right reasons. Sophia looked down at her hands, her mind swirling with emotions she couldn't yet name. She didn't trust easily, but Sebastian's vulnerability had chipped away at the walls she'd built around her heart. A few days later, Sophia received an unexpected visit from her parents. She hadn't seen them in months, not since she had told them about her pregnancy. The rift between them had been painful, their disappointment cutting deeper than she wanted to admit. When she opened the door to find her mother and father standing there, her breath caught. "Mom, Dad?" she said, her voice trembling. Her mother stepped forward, her eyes glistening with tears. "Sophia, we've been so worried about you." Her father, more reserved, cleared his throat. "We saw the press conference. Is it true? That man, the president, he's the father?" Sophia nodded, her heart pounding. "Yes, and he's been supportive. He's trying to do the right thing." Her mother reached out, taking Sophia's hands in her own. "We may not have agreed with your decisions, but we love you, Sophia. And we want to be there for you and the baby." Tears welled in her eyes as she pulled her mother into a hug. "I missed you so much," she whispered. Her father joined the embrace, his voice gruff but sincere. "You'll always have us, kiddo." That evening, after her parents had left, Sebastian arrived at her apartment, unannounced. He was visibly tense, his phone in hand. "I need to talk to you," he said. "What's wrong?" she asked, sensing his unease. "There's been another leak," he said, running a hand through his hair. "This time it's worse. They've published photos of your parents leaving the building, speculating about our relationship and the baby. It's getting out of control." Sophia's stomach sank. She hadn't wanted her family dragged into the spotlight. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm holding a second press conference," Sebastian said firmly. "This time, I'm going to set the record straight. Completely." Sophia stared at him, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean, completely?" "I'm going to announce our relationship," he said, his tone resolute. "I'll tell them that we're working together to build a life for our child. No more half-truths. No more speculation." Her eyes widened. "Sebastian, that's—" "Necessary," he interrupted gently. "The media won't stop until they have a story. Let's give them the truth on our terms." Sophia hesitated, her mind racing. It was a bold move, one that would tie her life to his even more publicly. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw determination and sincerity. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's do it." The next day, Sebastian stood behind the podium, Sophia by his side. The room buzzed with anticipation, reporters jostling for position. Sebastian's voice was steady as he spoke. "Today, I want to address the speculation surrounding my personal life. Sophia Lane and I are partners in every sense of the word. We are committed to raising our child together, and I fully support her and our growing family. The room erupted in questions, but Sebastian held firm, his arm brushing against Sophia's in silent reassurance. That night, as they sat together in her apartment, watching the news coverage of the press conference, Sophia felt a shift in the air between them. For the first time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, they could navigate this complicated road together. Sebastian's declaration at the press conference marked a turning point in their relationship. For the first time, Sophia felt like they were facing the world together instead of on opposing sides. The days that followed were surprisingly calm as the public adjusted to the idea of the president's impending fatherhood. Despite lingering curiosity from the media, Sebastian's firm stance left little room for speculation. One weekend, he invited Sophia to his countryside retreat, a sprawling estate nestled in the hills, far from the relentless buzz of the city. She hesitated at first, but Sebastian assured her it would be a chance to escape the chaos and breathe. After some persuasion, she agreed. When they arrived, Sophia was stunned by the beauty of the property. Rolling green hills surrounded the estate, dotted with wildflowers swaying in the breeze. The house itself was elegant but welcoming, its stone facade giving it a timeless charm. This place is incredible, Sophia said, stepping out of the car and taking in the view. It's one of the few places where I feel like I can just be myself, Sebastian admitted, watching her reaction with a soft smile. No cameras, no speeches, just peace. Sophia followed him inside, where the staff had already prepared everything for their stay. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the formal surroundings she'd associated with him before. For the first time, she saw glimpses of the man beneath the title. Over the next few days, their dynamic began to shift. The tension that had once defined their interactions was replaced by a growing sense of ease. They spent their mornings walking through the gardens, their conversations light and free-flowing. In the afternoons, they cooked together in the spacious kitchen, Sebastian proving surprisingly adept at making pasta from scratch. "You've been holding out on me," Sophia teased, as she watched him knead the dough with practiced hands. "I have to keep some secrets," he replied with a grin, his usual composed demeanor softening into something far more approachable. In these quiet moments, Sophia found herself letting her guard down. She laughed more easily, her smiles no longer tinged with hesitation, and Sebastian, ever observant, noticed every small shift in her demeanor. It was as though the walls she'd built to protect herself were slowly crumbling, one shared meal, one lingering glance at a time. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sophia turned to him, her expression contemplative. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked softly. Sebastian met her gaze, his gray eyes steady. "Because I wanted you to see that there's more to my life than the presidency. I wanted you to know the real me, the person I am when no one's watching." Sophia's heart twisted at his words. She'd spent so long assuming his actions were driven by duty. But now she saw something deeper. "And what do you think of me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His answer came without hesitation. "I think you're stronger than you realize, and I think you've been carrying this burden alone for far too long." He paused, his tone softening. "Let me carry it with you, Sophia." Her throat tightened, emotions she hadn't fully acknowledged bubbling to the surface. She looked away, blinking back tears. I don't know if I can trust that this isn't just temporary, she admitted. Sebastian reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. Then let me show you it's not. Their time at the estate deepened their connection, but reality intruded sooner than they had hoped. The final weeks of Sophia's pregnancy were challenging, with unexpected aches and bouts of fatigue. Sebastian stayed by her side through it all, accompanying her to every appointment and ensuring she had everything she needed. His unwavering presence became a source of comfort, even as she struggled to let go of her lingering fears. One late evening, as they sat in her living room, Sophia groaned and shifted uncomfortably on the couch. I feel like a whale, she muttered, trying to find a position that didn't strain her back. Sebastian chuckled, sitting beside her and propping a pillow behind her back. A very graceful whale, he teased, earning a half-hearted glare from her. You're lucky I'm too tired to hit you, she retorted, though a small smile tugged at her lips. Moments like these became their norm. Banter and laughter woven into the chaos of impending parenthood. Sebastian often marveled at how natural it felt, as though they were building something solid despite the whirlwind circumstances. One early morning, the peace was abruptly shattered. Sophia woke with a sharp pain in her abdomen, her breath hitching as another contraction followed. Panic and excitement coursed through her in equal measure. Sebastian, she called, her voice tinged with urgency. He rushed into the room, still half asleep but instantly alert at the sight of her gripping the bedpost. What's wrong? It's time, she managed, wincing as another contraction hit. Sebastian didn't waste a second. He grabbed the hospital bag they had packed weeks earlier and helped her to the car. As they sped through the quiet streets, his usually steady composure wavered. You're doing great, he said, glancing at her between turns. Just hold on a little longer. Easy for you to say, Sophia muttered through gritted teeth, clutching the armrest. When they arrived at the hospital, a team of nurses whisked her into the delivery room. Sebastian stayed by her side, his hand wrapped tightly around hers. Hours passed in a blur of pain and effort. But finally, the room was filled with the sound of a baby's first cries. It's a girl, the doctor announced, placing a tiny bundle in Sophia's arms. Sophia's exhaustion melted away as she looked down at her daughter. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, Hi, baby. I'm your mom. Sebastian stood beside her, his eyes misty as he gazed at their child. When he reached out to gently touch the baby's hand, her tiny fingers curled around his. She's perfect, he said, his voice thick with emotion. In that moment, Sophia saw a vulnerability in him that matched her own. The weight of their shared journey culminated in the miracle they now held, and for the first time she felt a deep sense of unity with him. The days that followed were a whirlwind of sleepless nights and countless diaper changes. Despite the challenges, Sophia and Sebastian found a rhythm, working together to care for their daughter, whom they named Isla Grace. One night, as they stood over Isla's crib, watching her sleep, Sebastian reached for Sophia's hand. I don't think I've ever been this happy, he admitted quietly. Sophia glanced at him, her heart swelling with emotion. Neither have I, she replied, her voice soft. Sebastian turned to her, his expression serious. I know this hasn't been easy for us, but I want you to know something. He paused, searching her face. I love you, Sophia, not because of the baby, not because of the baby, not because of any obligation. Jew, her breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent months guarding herself, afraid to believe in something so uncertain. But in that moment, looking into his eyes, she realized she didn't need to hold back anymore. I love you too, she whispered, tears spilling over. Sebastian pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the weight of their journey melted away. Together, they stood in the quiet of the nursery, the bond between them stronger than ever. It was no longer just about the baby. They had found something far deeper: trust, love, and the promise of a future they would build together. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the nursery. Sophia stirred awake in bed, hearing the faint cries of Isla Grace from the next room. She sat up, her body still adjusting to the sleepless rhythm of motherhood. Before she could move, Sebastian gently touched her arm. I'll get her, he said softly, already slipping out of bed. Sophia watched him disappear into the nursery, her heart swelling at the sight of his quiet dedication. Moments later, he returned with Isla in his arms, her tiny face nuzzled into his chest. She just wanted some company, Sebastian murmured, settling beside Sophia and handing Isla to her. Like her mother, she doesn't like to be alone. Sophia chuckled, cradling her daughter. She's already spoiled, she teased. Of course, Sebastian replied, smiling. She's a Grey. It's only fitting. Their mornings often started like this, peaceful moments before the demands of the day began. It had been 3 months since Isla's birth, and life had taken on a new shape for both of them. Despite the challenges, they were learning to navigate parenthood together. As they dressed Isla for the day, Sebastian leaned against the dresser, watching Sophia gently secure the tiny buttons on Isla's onesie. You're natural, he said, his voice full of admiration. Sophia glanced at him, her cheeks flushing. I'm just figuring it out as I go. Same as you. You give me too much credit, he replied with a wry smile. Most of the time, I'm just winging it. Sophia laughed, and for a moment everything felt light and easy. Later that day, Sebastian had arranged a small gathering at the countryside estate to celebrate Isla's christening. It was an intimate affair, with only close friends and family in attendance. Sophia stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple but elegant dress she had chosen for the occasion. As she secured a gold necklace around her neck, Sebastian appeared behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. You look beautiful, he said, his reflection meeting hers in the mirror. Sophia turned to face him, smiling softly. Thank you. You don't look so bad yourself. Sebastian, dressed in a tailored suit, let out a small laugh. Flattery will get you everywhere. The sound of car doors closing outside drew their attention, and Sophia's heart fluttered as she realized the guests were arriving. She took a deep breath, nervous about seeing everyone, especially Sebastian's family. It'll be fine, Sebastian said, sensing her hesitation. He placed a reassuring hand on her back. They're going to love you. The ceremony was held in the estate's garden, surrounded by blooming flowers and the soft hum of nature. Isla, dressed in a white christening gown, was the star of the event, Guests cooed over her as they gathered near the altar. Sebastian's parents, King Arthur and Queen Eleanor Grey, had flown in from Veridia for the occasion. Despite their formal titles, they greeted Sophia with warmth. The Queen, in particular, seemed eager to bond with her. "You've done a wonderful job raising her," Eleanor said, holding Isla in her arms. Sophia smiled, grateful for the compliment. "It's been a learning experience, but Sebastian has been incredible." Eleanor glanced at her son, a hint of pride in her eyes. "He's changed since you came into his life. For the better. I hope you know how much that means to us." The words left Sophia momentarily speechless. She hadn't expected such an open acknowledgement from someone of Eleanor's stature. As the day went on, Sophia found herself relaxing in the presence of the Grey family and her own parents, who had warmed to Sebastian over time. The atmosphere was light and joyous, with laughter filling the air as guests mingled and shared stories. Sebastian took every opportunity to stay close to Sophia and Isla, ensuring they felt his support throughout the event. At one point, he caught Sophia watching him as he held Isla, her tiny fingers gripping his tie. "What?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Nothing," Sophia said, smiling. "You're just—" He grinned. Flattery again. "You're spoiling me now." She rolled her eyes, but her smile lingered. As the sun began to set, the guests moved to the patio for dinner. The table was adorned with candles and fresh flowers, casting a golden glow over everyone seated. Sebastian stood and raised his glass, drawing the attention of the crowd. "I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for being here," he began, his voice steady and sincere. "Today is about Isla, but it's also about family. Over the past few months, I've learned what it truly means to have one. Sophia, you've given me something I never thought I'd have, a home. And Isla," he paused, his gaze softening as he looked at his daughter. "Isla has shown me what unconditional love really is." Sophia felt tears sting her eyes as Sebastian continued. "I'm not perfect, but I promise to spend every day earning the life we've built together. Thank you all for being part of this journey." The table erupted in applause, and Sophia reached for Sebastian's hand, squeezing it tightly. After the guests had left and Isla was sound asleep, Sophia and Sebastian sat together on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. The cool night air was filled with the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. "This feels surreal," Sophia said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "In a good way, I hope," Sebastian replied, his arm around her. She nodded. "For the first time in a long time, I feel content, like everything's fallen into place." Sebastian pressed a kiss to her temple. "That's because it has. We're exactly where we're meant to be." Sophia turned to face him, her expression serious. "Do you really think we can make this work? With everything, the media, your responsibilities, our differences?" "Our differences." He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I don't think we can. I know we can. Because no matter what, I'll always choose you and Isla. Every single time." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, and she smiled through them. "I love you more," Sebastian replied, his voice thick with emotion. They stayed like that for a while, holding each other as the stars glittered above them. The future was uncertain, but together they felt ready to face whatever came their way. And for Sophia, the girl who had once thought she'd face life's challenges alone, it was the beginning of something she had never dared to dream, a life filled with love, family, and hope. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. Your time and attention mean the world to us, and we hope you found every twist and turn as captivating as we did sharing it with you. Don't miss out on more dramatic, heartfelt, and thrilling stories. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you're always the first to watch our latest videos. See you in the next one.